Despite former President Trump being out of the White House, the baseless conspiracy theory QAnon, which supports him, is still maintaining a strong following online and in homes nationwide. The rift between believers and their loved ones is only growing and harming lifelong relationships, sometimes between parent and child. A recent Washington Post report looked into the personal toll of QAnon on families. So Greg Jaffe is a co-author of that piece and is joining us now. Greg, really good to have you here. Very, very good piece. I think that many people will read it and recognize situations in their own family. I know people who were happy that Thanksgiving was canceled this past year because they just didn't want to have those conversations with their family members. The assault on the Capitol in January, President Biden's inauguration, and the supposed inauguration of Mr. Trump on March 4th, according to the QAnon community, all did not turn out the way that believers thought they would. So what is the continued allure for supporters of QAnon?
I think part of it is that QAnon was never really about Trump, and it's never really about world events. I think what was interesting about QAnon and appealing to its people or its followers was that it simplified a complex world. It created a sense of good and evil in the world. And so at a time of real turmoil, particularly this last year with the pandemic and other things, it gave you a narrative to help you make sense of what was happening. I think the other thing is it offers people like a religion almost, a sense of purpose and meaning. So if you feel like you're not doing great in your life, this tells you know things that other people don't know. And beyond that, the world is out to get you. The universe is out to get you. And in some ways, that makes you feel important. If you don't, it makes you feel like your life has meaning.
Yeah, the other thing I always thought about QAnon is it sort of like takes all comers, right? So whatever you're kind of upset about, whether you're concerned about the family structure in this country or the food that we eat or whatever it is, there's some element of it, like tentacles, that sort of morphs in and sucks you in. So it was very interesting because for this article, you guys were able to tap into a subreddit about QAnon, about people who have been damaged by QAnon. And essentially, it was just an outlet for people whose family members are QAnon believers, and it was driving them bonkers, not just bonkers, but to the point where they felt they needed therapy. In many cases, we're talking about children and their parents. These are people that they love. So it's, you can't just sort of disown your parents. So some people have, but there was a lot of angst on that page. Can you talk about kind of the conversations that you saw when you went into this Reddit page?
Sure, it was really heartbreaking. So it's called QAnon Casualties, and it starts a couple years ago, but it really takes off around the time of the election. And then part of the reason I think it does is that a lot of those family members were hoping, okay, the election will happen. If Trump loses, this will break the spell. Then the next hope was that if Biden's inaugurated, it will break the spell. So you see this massive growth around this time when family members are just fed up and really hurt that their loved ones don't seem to be coming around. So it's everything from venting to looking for advice. I mean, the most heartbreaking ones for me, and you can go on and read the subreddit, and there are just hundreds and new ones every day, were from kids, teenagers who felt like they had lost their parents, their mother or father. In many cases, they loved their mother and father, and they just couldn't understand what was happening. And those were the ones that really get you. But you saw other ones, people talking about leaving their spouses because they can't take it anymore, moving out of their houses. Just felt like life after life being upended.
Yeah, you talk about Tyler. His story is sort of throughout the whole piece. That's not his name. But what you really get is it's not just a matter of political differences here. They are watching their loved ones not only sort of become more extreme politically, but also sort of at least speak with violent language. Purchase weapons. I mean, it's like another personality has taken over some of their loved ones, and much like a dysfunctional relationship, when you can't sort of bring your spouse to marriage counseling, you may go by yourself, and some of these people have gone by themselves to figure out how to deal with their loved ones. What are therapists and mental health experts saying about QAnon and how it compares to maybe other conspiracy theories, or if you want to call it maybe online cults, or anything sort of in that basket, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing they say is don't try to argue with the person. Don't assume that it's a sign that your loved one is stupid or racist or any of those things. Don't try to reason with the person. The best thing you can do is, show the person love and to try to talk to the person about events that happened before this went sour. So essentially talk to them about better times in your life. Wait for them to come around, but continue to leave the door open. Like, the worst thing that you can do is to sort of confront them, to try to scream them into getting out of it. Because in some ways you're just closing the door, you're isolating them, and you're pushing them further into that QAnon community.
I think QAnon is kind of this unique thing that has sort of popped up recently, which is sort of the idea of an online cult. Sort of cults from days gone by. You'd have to kind of gather people together in a central location, convince them to leave their homes, and none of that is necessary for something like QAnon. And I don't know if calling it a cult is accurate or not. It's just sort of a collection of conspiracy theories. But any of the experts you spoke to, did they discuss, why it is that this QAnon stuff is particularly potent and different from maybe similar attempts at, influencing people with misinformation before we could do it all online?
Yeah, it is really potent. I think some of it has to do with the pandemic. It's been really isolating. People are alone. People are spending a lot more time online. That certainly has something to do with it. Some of it is, social media algorithms are a really powerful thing, and I think we're just beginning to understand their power. If you start to click on this stuff, it just feeds you more and more and more. And so your social media algorithms really narrow your view of the world and sort of channel you into some of this sort of cult-like stuff. Now, Twitter and Facebook have done a much better job of late after the January 6th insurrection of getting that stuff off of their platforms. But for a long time, it was there. The other thing that's really compelling about it is that it's interactive. Even though it's online, it continues to be interactive. You can search for clues. It operates almost like a video game in some ways. And just as video games can be, addictive and compelling, this is addictive and compelling.
I think that is so interesting because you can convince yourself that you're not just a follower, you're a contributor. You're trying to figure out the clues that Q is dropping. And I can see how that can be alluring. Greg, Jaffe, it's a great article. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.